India is a vast country. It extends from the mountains of the Himalayas in the north to the Coromandel coast in the south. There are flat plains, towns and cities. 1,000 million people live here. Some people are well off and live in great comfort. Others have very little to call their own. There are 18 major languages in India, and its people follow many different religions. But today, all these millions of people elect one central government here in the capital, New Delhi. But 400 years ago, it was different. India was divided into dozens of different territories, each ruled by its own king or prince. This is the great Mughal Emperor Akbar. His armies conquered many kingdoms, and his court was famous for its fabulous riches. India's rulers built magnificent palaces. They had artists and craftsmen fill them with beautiful objects. They loved fine glass and jewelry, and they delighted in exquisite fabrics. Some, like this cloth, was exported to Europe, where it became very fashionable. European merchants started sailing into Indian ports to buy sugar, cloth and spices. Soon, Indian rulers gave some permission to set up permanent trading posts. By 1640, the British had 5. Over the next 100 years, British traders did very well. They made a lot of money for themselves and for the British government, and they wanted to make more. So when local rulers refused to let them trade freely in their area, the British went to war and forced them to cooperate. Gradually, the British took control of more and more of the continent. No Indian rulers remained independent. And in 1877, the British Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of all India. Many British people had come to live in India and run the country. Some were in the army or worked for the government. Others built roads and railways. They set up hospitals and schools. There were factory managers and businessmen of all kinds. But many Indians didn't like the way the British ran the country. They felt the British were making too much money out of India, and this was making many Indians poorer. And there were several terrible famines. Over the years, there were plenty of uprisings and protests against British rule. Sometimes, leaders were arrested without trial. On the 13th of April 1919, a terrible tragedy occurred at a festival in the city of Amritsar. There had been demonstrations all over the country and violent riots in some places. In Amritsar, the local authorities banned all public meetings. Despite the ban, people gathered for the festival, and some people were making protest speeches.
Strikes defenseless people. It shows its brutality, its own weakness, especially when those people do not strike back.
The crowd was entirely unarmed and peaceful.
But if we riot, if we fight back, we become the vandals and they become the law.
This army unit was commanded by a man called General Dyer.
Should we issue a warning, sir?
They've had their warning. No meetings.
"375 unarmed people were killed. This massacre shocked all India and made Indians who had never thought about politics before turn against British rule. Back in Britain, many people were shocked too, and General Dyer was forced to leave the army. But many other British people supported him, and this increased the protests. Mahatma Gandhi was one Indian leader who took up the struggle against British rule after the massacre at Amritsar. As a young man, he had had a successful career as a lawyer overseas. At the age of 42, he returned to India. He was shocked to discover how poor most Indian villages were, so he decided to devote his life to freeing them from poverty. He toured the country and gave lectures on the subject. He believed that people fighting for the poor should live and dress simply. How could people in Bond Street suits or Bombay trousers win peasant support? He asked. On one famous occasion, he sharply criticized the dazzling clothes and wealth of his audience. They included Maharajas, princes, and the British governor of India. Several very important people walked out in disgust. He himself started living simply, wearing only a white cotton dhoti like the villagers he campaigned for. He believed passionately that if something was unfair, you should fight to change it, but peacefully, without any violence. When he was 61, he started the most famous campaign of his life. It was all about salt. Salt is essential for flavoring food and for our health. Everyone needs to eat it. The government controlled who was allowed to produce salt in India, and they taxed it, which made it very expensive. But it's very cheap and easy to make. In shallow waters along the coast, seawater is allowed to flood specially built salt pans like these. As the water evaporates, the salt crystallizes. It can then be collected and left to dry in the sun. On some beaches, salt crystallizes naturally, but it used to be illegal to gather and sell it. The British Governor-General of India received a letter from Gandhi asking him to change the salt law because it was unfair. The Governor-General refused. So Gandhi declared that he was going to break the salt law, but he didn't say exactly how. With 78 fellow protesters, he started marching from his home to a beach at a place called Dandi, 200 miles away. Thousands joined them on their 3-week journey. Legend had it that the beach at Dandi was where the British had first arrived in India. No one knew how Gandhi was going to break the law, but he warned his supporters that even if British troops attacked them, they should stay calm and not fight back. After saying some prayers, Gandhi walked slowly along the beach. Suddenly, he bent down and scooped up a handful of salt. Bravely, everyone followed his example and began gathering sea salt and putting it in buckets. British troops moved in, and many of these peaceful protesters were arrested. Gandhi was sent to jail the next day. But the salt protesters didn't give up. All over India, people went on gathering salt. There was no violence by the protesters, but the government couldn't control the situation because of the sheer numbers involved. They couldn't arrest everyone. The government had no alternative. The salt law was changed. The success of the salt protests made British politicians realize they had to move more quickly towards letting the Indians rule themselves. So in 1931, several key Indian leaders sailed to London for talks about India's future. Most leaders stayed in great comfort in the West End of London, but Gandhi was more at home amongst the ordinary people of London's East End.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Why take only one? I take two. Kill.
In Britain, Gandhi was well known for his support for the poor and for justice. Everywhere he went, people wanted to meet him.
Whatever the result of the mission that brought me to London, I know that I shall carry with me the pleasantest memories of my stay in the midst of the poor people of East London.
But their mission was not a success. They talked and talked for 3 months but reached no agreement, though later the British did give Indians in a few regions the right to rule themselves. There followed 16 more years of talks and protests. Meanwhile in Germany, Hitler came to power. Then he started the Second World War. He was defeated by the Allies before the British finally agreed to leave India. At midnight on the 14th of August 1947, India became an independent state, though it was not quite the way Gandhi had imagined. The British colony was divided into separate countries. Pakistan was created as a state for Muslims, and India as a country with no official religion, even though most people there were Hindu. This is what Gandhi had wanted for the whole of British India. He believed that everyone should live peacefully together no matter what their religion. Some people bitterly opposed this idea and hated Gandhi for it. 5 months after independence, Gandhi was walking with friends to a prayer meeting. His murderer was a Hindu who believed Gandhi was much too sympathetic to the Muslims. All over India, people mourned for the father of the nation, as Gandhi was called. Over 1 million people attended his funeral. It is now 50 years since India gained her independence. What would Gandhi make of the country today? He discovered that India's many people were still ruled by one central government. He'd find that even though there is still great poverty, the average Indian today lives over 60 years. Most people died before they were 40 in his time. India grows enough food for everyone, but some people are still too poor to feed themselves properly. But there's been no famine for over 20 years. Many Indians are very well off today. Gandhi might be surprised about some aspects of their lives, but perhaps no more surprised than your great-great-grandparents would be about the way you live. In 1947, only 4 out of 10 children went to primary school. Today, it is 8 out of 10. And to celebrate the 50th anniversary of India's independence, the Indian government has made it compulsory for every child to receive free education until they are 14. This would probably please Gandhi very much indeed.